So, if you haven't heard, Shia Laboeuf has converted to Catholicism. He's been in a ton of movies. He is, objectively speaking, an incredible actor. This has been all over the news. I'm not the first person to talk about this in the Catholic world. But he had a landmark interview with Bishop Barron, and we learned a lot from that interview. One of the things that I learned, or sort of was reinforced for me, is that Bishop Barron, as smart as he is, and I mean that, he's really intelligent. I mean, he's very smart. He's got a big brain, you know. He can reason his way through some things. He's obviously very well read. He's very articulate. But he just doesn't get it. And the blind spots in this sort of Vatican II mindset were so glaringly obvious in this interview with Shia Laboeuf. And what I mean by that is, Shia Laboeuf is an actor who has been in like the pits of hell. I mean, if you follow this guy's life, he has been a hedonist. He's been a rationalist, almost atheist. He said he was never really an atheist, but kind of, you know, borderline. He's been, I think at one point, he basically did like a pornographic indie film or something like that. I mean, this guy has been in the depths, the dumps. He's been in the depths of despair, lost in the culture. He's clearly extremely, you know, actors have this sort of really good actors, the types that can do sort of method acting. They do have this kind of three-dimensional emotionalism about them that really helps them feel deeply on things, which can be a curse in their personal lives, but when they're actors, it can be quite useful. But in any case, here's a young man. He's not that old. I think he's around my age. He has been pulled out of the depths of despair, and he talks about it being largely because of the traditional Latin Mass. And there's a moment in that interview where Shia Laboeuf presents, to be honest, some of the most incredible critiques of sort of new Mass theology in a very basic common sense perspective, while at the same time he says this, and Bishop Barron goes, well, how come? How come you prefer the traditional Latin Mass? So we'll just watch that clip here together, and then we'll comment.
All the agency was put on the priest. And so, and I don't want to get too far into this because then you get into controversy, but Latin Mass affects me deeply, deeply.
How come?
Because it feels like they're not selling me a car. And when I go to some Mass with the guitars and stuff, and I'm from, you know, Santa Ynez, right? So that's where I was catechized. And there's a lot of guitar playing, and there's a lot of like what feels like they're trying to sell me on an idea.
Yeah.
Whereas what I feel when I went to Oakland and went to like, and by the way, there's a very incredible version of that as well that's super activating and very emotional that I've experienced up there with Father Bobby. There's also, and Father Peter, but there's also this, something that happened, you know, Christ the King in Oakland does a Latin Mass every day of the week. And it feels like it's not being done to sell me on anything. And it feels almost like I'm being let in on something very special. And the quiet, it activates something in me where it feels like I found something. It's a little bit like a band. When a band is pushed on you, it doesn't feel the same way as you finding it. When you find it, then you root for it. It feels like this special thing that you found, and you protect it, and you hold it, and it's yours.
One of the great things about living in Canada, besides all the communism, is that because your prime minister is one of the Cuban royal family, you get to buy good Cubans here. In any case, it's amazing. He says, Latin Mass, Shia says this, Latin Mass affects me deeply. And the first thing that Bishop Barron says is, how come? And I'm sure he asked that in a real earnest sense. I'm not saying that he was so surprised it could affect him deeply. But immediately Shia says, essentially, that the Latin Mass is authentic and that the new Mass comes off as inauthentic. And he has some interesting words to say about that. But you see here, even in a neophyte Catholic like Shia Laboeuf, meaning a new Catholic, a man who is newly coming to the faith, you know, he's really finding it for the first time. And he recognizes that the analogy he uses is perfect when he talks about it's like finding a band. And it's just something that you find and that it's yours and you hold on to it. And you know, this is the paradox of Christianity. This is the paradox, but it's exemplified in the traditional Mass. None of us, virtually none of us, grew up with the traditional Mass. Most of us did not. I mean, statistically speaking, in today's church, if you go to the traditional Mass, it's very likely that you did not grow up with the traditional Mass. But I guarantee you that you had the same experience that I had, and you had the same experience that Shia Laboeuf had, even as someone who was so far away from the faith, that when you finally found it, you found something that you realized you were homesick for your whole life, even though you didn't know it existed. I remember the first time I went to as Shia talks about going to the low Mass. I remember the first time that I went to a low Mass. And I was so confused. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know that it started. That's a common experience. The priest comes out and he's just at the altar, moving around, not saying anything out loud. I don't know what's going on. And I remember just watching him do things and immediately going, oh wow, I'm in a place where I'm supposed to be quiet, and this is completely out of my hands, and I basically had to let go and let God, as the expression goes. Now, it was supremely disorienting, but it was also challenging. It made me curious as to how I could be going to this new Mass that's supposed to be Catholic for so many years, and then I go to this Mass that every Catholic in the Roman Rite, or, you know, some variation thereof, I know there was discrepancy in different regional versions, but this Mass is the meat and potatoes of what was going on for basically 20 centuries for Catholics in sort of the western part of Europe and the New World. We're talking about billions of Catholics have gone to this. All my ancestors, my Italian and English ancestors who were Catholics in both countries, they went to this Mass. They were persecuted for this Mass, even in England, you know. And I didn't know what was happening. That is a supremely disturbing feeling when you're at the thing that everyone in your bloodline in history had gone to, but you don't even know what it is. But at the same time, you know you're supposed to be there. It's very confusing, but it strikes at the heart of the Catholic sense. This is something you get through your sacraments, you see. And it's not just a logical thing. It's not just a head rationalistic thing. And this is something that Shia will elaborate on here in a second, because after this little exchange they had, Bishop Barron, being a good interviewer, I mean, again, I'm trying to be charitable. He's a very smart man. I'm sure that he is really concerned about Shia Laboeuf. I'm sure that Bishop Barron wishes that we could all just sing Kumbaya together and not have any problems. I imagine he wants that. You know, he seems like a good man. But it's interesting, after this little exchange they have, Bishop Barron goes back to this idea that he just wants to have this thing where people from both sides can find a place where they can all come together and everyone can get what they want. But anyway, don't take my word for it. Let's just watch it here
Part
quick.
of the idea of using incense, which we do at the Catholic Mass, and we say, well, our prayer is going up to God. Yes, indeed. But part of the symbolism there is it blocks our vision. The smoke gets
Yes.
in the way.
Yes.
And in fact, it gets in your eyes even.
Yes.
Where people are coughing and I can't see. But that's appropriate around sacred things. If everything's wide open to view and under bright light, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's by definition not the sacred in a way.
Yeah.
So, see, the challenge to me is trying to find a way to honor all these things we're talking about. And the liturgical wars going on are often people on both sides seeing good things in their approach. But it's trying to find the place where they can all find expression.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Yeah.
challenge.
And I do, I mean, as a person who's involved in the arts, to deny some of the senses, it heightens some of the others. So when you put me in this rationalistic, logical, word, plot, it takes me out of the feeling realm.
Yeah.
Whereas Latin Mass puts me squarely in the feeling realm because I can't argue the word, because I don't know what the word means.
Yeah.
So I'm just left with this feeling that feels sacred and connected. And really what hindered my I was never an atheist. I was always an agnostic, even when I was a Sam Harris, TED Talk, Christopher Hitchens guy, which is who I was before I fell in. I always had a belief, but I never had like a connection. Latin Mass gave me something where I felt connected, which took me out of belief into connection. Belief kept me, I had belief because that's the rational, logical. It's not logical or rational to be atheist. If you really go deep enough, you get to the Big Bang and then you're screwed again. You have to account for it somehow, which puts you in a belief situation.
Right.
But too much of that logic and too much of that rationale takes me out of feeling, which takes me out of connection.
Honestly, I don't want to over-sentimentalize the things that Shia has said. Listen, this guy's a celebrity. God forbid, but there's, it's likely that being a celebrity, unless he kind of escapes Hollywood or at least kind of does the Jim Caviezel thing where he's very particular about what he does and kind of lives a very private life, it's likely that people are going to find reasons to be upset with him. And, oh, look, Jim, this Shia Laboeuf guy is caught with some girl or something. What kind of Catholic is that? I mean, leave the guy alone. Don't make the guy into your hero. Don't start asking him to speak at all your conferences and make him a model. Just let him be Catholic and let him save his soul, okay? Treat him like you would a regular human being. But I must say, the way he's speaking, to me, it echoes everything that I think that the world is not understanding about traditional Catholicism. It's interesting. He says Bishop Barron is trying to explain that he just wishes there was a way that the sacred could be, basically, that the Novus Ordoites could be satisfied and that the liturgy wars would stop and that the traditionalists could come together and there'd be no more liturgy wars. And I understand the sentiment, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening, in my opinion. Even the new Mass, listen, the new Mass is not the Mass of Vatican II. To be honest, the Mass that looks much more like the Mass that you would find in the documents of Vatican II is the traditional Mass. Even the Unicorn, the Unicorn Novus Ordo Mass, it is not the Vatican II Mass, because the Unicorn Novus Ordo Mass was never meant to be celebrated in Latin. This was made obvious by Paul VI in the mid-60s. It was written in Latin because that's the language of official things in the church, and therefore it's promulgated there, but it was meant to be translated. It was never meant to be in Latin. It was meant to be spoken aloud. It was not meant to be done the way the traditional Latin Mass is done. So it's not even as if it was made in a way that could satisfy the stipulations of the traditional Mass. But Shia says something really insightful when he says he went from this difference of belief to connection. And now he's speaking here as he's just speaking from the heart. He's just an actor, and he's sort of coming to understand these things but I think if we could use a more sort of scriptural term, I would say this difference between belief and faith. And what he says is when he goes to the Latin Mass, he has a connection. But I think what I would say is that you find your faith, and the connection part is an aspect of that faith. And we think about when St. Paul says we walk by faith and not by sight. That doesn't mean we walk because we walk in a blind way, but what it means is we walk by a certain almost spiritual sense that is deeper and more profound even than the physical senses. Okay? And this is why the type of liturgy we go to makes a certain type of connection. And every time you have a connection, you're going to be connected to something. And if you go to the new Mass, you're going to be connected to the horizontal. You're going to be connected to this world, because it's presented in a way, it's very much like Luther's recommendations that you find in his writings from the 1500s about this is for the people. Whereas if you go to the Latin Mass, or any traditional liturgy for that matter that's done properly, in the East as well, you go to a liturgy that connects you to the depth of a relationship between you and something that's completely other. And it's funny. People think that traditional Catholics were these like rigid guys who just only read St. Thomas Aquinas and we're there because we're so we don't have any empathy and we're so harsh. This is persona of this traditional Catholic. It's completely the opposite. I mean, there's people like that everywhere. I'm sure the people like that exist. going to the traditional Mass is ironically one of those places where you see men, rugged, manly men, actually feel something. That's the crazy part. You know, I go to a traditional chapel and there's a load of these young single men there, these handsome, well put together bros who are the furthest thing from a person that you would think would have this, like, I'm going to have this feely thing with something. But they're at the traditional Mass because that's where the true, rightly ordered masculine intimacy is found. I think that's what Shia Laboeuf's trying to say. That's what I think. And that is not found in the Novus Ordo. The Novus Ordo is not masculine. It's just not. I really hope that Bishop Barron learns something. I mean that. Like, listen, Bishop Barron, this is going to get me in trouble with some traditionalists, but listen, if Bishop Barron was not trained in these sort of modernist, post-Second Vatican Council, modernist, ways, I think Bishop Barron would be a great bishop of the church. This is why I mean this. Like, there have always been prelates in the history of the church who were, what's the word I'm looking for here? Intellectual, big brains, pushing the limits with ideas, but they were buttressed in this foundation of being formed properly and having the right faith because of praying the right way. And the fundamentals of praying the right way, saying the right liturgy, fundamentally reconfigure who you are inside. And Bishop Barron's never done that. So the world sees him very much as a conservative, because morally he is a conservative. But liturgically, he's very much a liberal. And I think it creates this dichotomy, and I don't think we see the full potential of what a man like Bishop Barron could offer. Honestly, I pray that he says the traditional Mass. I pray that he comes to love tradition, because he's a bishop, he's extremely smart, clearly he's very insightful, he was very kind to Shia Laboeuf. You could see him wrestling with these things. All liturgy wars that Bishop Barron talks about aside, all, YouTube commentary aside, if we could just have a man like Bishop Barron, embrace tradition, man, that would be good for the church, wouldn't it? Anyway, we can hope. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel. Check out the links in the description to help us continue to grow. You can find my books there. And pray for Shia Laboeuf, because he's now come out as a Catholic. Look what happened to Mel Gibson after he did The Passion. The man's life was destroyed for a time, right? That something like that probably is around the corner for Shia Laboeuf. So pray for him that he perseveres. If it comes out that he's, has a scandal or something like that, don't judge him. Just pray for him, because he's just a Catholic. And his sins are going to be public, being a celebrity. You're lucky that your sins aren't, but we're all just as wretched as one another, okay? Wonderful. Well, this has been a special report of the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.